Be careful what you wish for. It may come true. 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 True.
You see what fame has done to me. Kiss away the pain and leave it lonely. I never known if love's a lie. Being crazy in paradise is easy. This is the Christmas in my eyes. Where's the love to shelter me? Give me love.
Blackie Lawless, it's been a long time since the last album, Headless Children, came out, and now finally the Crimson Idol. It's been several years. What's been going on?
Well, contrary to popular belief, I feel more like Mark Twain. Rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated, you know. I know a lot of people think I took the money and ran out to Jamaica for about a year, but I tell you, that has not been the case. First thing I did was when the Headless tour was over. It was September of '89. And I went to Mexico for about 2 weeks, and I was contemplating my future, you know, what I was going to do with my life and all that stuff. And I've had this idea for the Crimson Idol since 1987, so I thought, well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to make that record. But before I do that, I'm going to build a state-of-the-art 24-track studio, which I did. It's a place I call Fort Apache. And I got to get my little commercial in there for the studio and all that. So I did that, and that took 8 months to build the studio. And unless, I mean, you can record in a lot of studios, but until you actually build one of your own, you don't really know what's involved. And it's an enormous undertaking, not to mention the money. And so we did that, and that took 8 months. But in the meantime, while we were doing that, I was writing the story for the Crimson Idol, and that took almost a year to write that. So while I'm writing the story, we're building the studio, and in my spare time, I'm starting to write music for it as well. And this is an enormously complicated story, and it took a long time to do it. And as we get further into this, I'll explain what took so long. But I found it was the kind of story that it just, once I got it, having an idea, it's like building a studio I was talking about. You have an idea is one thing, writing it is another, and as I got into it, it started growing and growing and growing, and pretty soon it turned into like Ghidra, the tin-headed monster, you know, and thank God it's done now.
It's what you could call a sort of a concept album based on, based on the life of a guy called Jonathan, who picks up the guitar, becomes a musician, and all the trials and tribulations and temptations and dangers he encounters as a musician. I mean, you don't really paint a very rosy picture of the music industry. Why did you become a musician in the first place, then?
Well, let me preface all this by saying that I get asked one question over and over again by the fans, and they say, give me some advice. How do I get from where I'm at to where you're at? And I tell them the same thing over and over again. I say, you got to want this really bad. And see, for myself, it's been the greatest thing. I mean, every dream has come true 1,000 times. But I am the exception to the rule. You know, and I don't mean to sound arrogant or anything, as I've been really, really lucky, you know. Not everyone is that lucky. You hear the expression that less than 1 in a million ever get a record deal, and that's true, and I'll give you an even more frightening statistic, and this is not an opinion, this is a fact, that out of all those 1 in a millions who ever get a record deal, less than 2% ever make any money out of it. And I did this record to show the fans the darkest side of what this business is really about. And then if they still think they want to do it after they've heard this story, then be my guest. single Chainsaw Charlie on the cover, there's a chair. It's representative of Charlie's office, because Charlie's supposed to be the president of one of the biggest record companies in the world. And on his chair, there's a little note like you see on somebody's desk, you know, back in 5 minutes, or gone to lunch, something like that. Charlie, there's a little note on his chair, says, "I save souls. I save them for me." And Charlie is kind of like the evil intellect of this whole thing, you know. So he's just one of the many characters that Jonathan encounters in this whole story. But like I said, I did it because I get asked that one question over and over again. And I'm not trying to preach to anybody to try and tell them not to do this. Because like I said, if somebody would have told me, I would have still done it anyway. But you got to make sure that your priorities are in order and you're into it for the right reasons, because if not, you can have your life ruined by it.
But this Chainsaw Charlie that you're talking about, a guy from the record industry, have you met many Chainsaw Charlies in your career?
I know one specifically is the president of Capitol Records in Los Angeles, you know, and I'm not shy about talking about who it is. I mean, I use some very uncomfortable adjectives to describe this man in the song. I can't say on TV exactly what I called him, but, you know, if you have the record, you'll know what I'm talking about. Most people want to know, is the first question they say, is it autobiographical? And it's not, because I know a lot of guys in this business, and I took a little bit from one guy's personality, and one from another, and one from another, and a little bit from me, and I put them all together, and that's who Jonathan is.
You saw some of the backside of it, I suppose, as a member of the New York Dolls in the 70s.
That was the worst. I mean, there was nothing worse than that. Little did I know, looking back on that, I can't think of, nor have I ever seen a situation that was like that. Now, I was only in that band for a very short period of time, right at the very end of the band, last few shows, actually. But I had known those guys before then, which is how I ended up getting the gig, but had seen them self-destruct. I mean, they were unbelievable. Made the Sex Pistols look like rank amateurs. I mean, I've never seen a band that, well, this is the only band I ever knew who could sit in an airplane terminal and miss 5 planes right in a row, you know. And I mean, it was a tour manager's nightmare, you know. It was an impossible situation to try to keep together. And I'm 19 years old, and I'm watching this, and I'm like, you know, thinking that the whole industry is like this. And little did I know that was the worst, and that nothing else I would ever see. Everything I saw after that paled by comparison. So I was fortunate in the sense that I got the worst of it out of the way first.
You were thrown in at the deep end and swum your way back?
Oh, man, it was like, well, in America, we have an expression we call it baptism by fire. And that's exactly what happened to me, and fortunately I made it. I mean, hey, you had 4 other guys at that point who were in love with the idea of trying to become Jim Morrison and doing their damnedest to succeed, too. You know, I mean, self-indulgence is a gross understatement. Calling that self-indulgence would be like calling King Kong a monkey.
the fact that you did those monstrous shows, weren't you ever afraid that, I mean, after all, the band was a very good musical band, and lyrically, after the first album, there's hardly been any lyrics about blood and guts at all. Aren't you afraid that that kind of shows would take people's attention away from the real power?
Yeah, well, that's what we were saying early on. I mean, we got aggravated because we were doing the shows earlier on just to entertain ourselves, you know, and we were trying to tell people, said, hey, you know, you're listening with your eyes and not your ears. And I read something the other day where some guy was talking about the first album, and he was going on and on and on about what a great classic record it was. And I thought, where the hell were you in the beginning? I mean, and this guy said he was around from the very beginning, but I'm thinking to myself, where were you in the very beginning when you were watching this show, but you didn't hear the music? I tried to tell you that that music was good, but you didn't want to listen because you're listening with your eyes and not your ears, you know. So I don't know. It's one of those kind of things that I've come to the conclusion to, that any artist, if he's doing something that's multidimensional, because all art should be viewed on multiple levels, not just one level, irregardless of whether some interpretations are only on one level. A true artist is going to try to do whatever he's doing on multiple levels. And like I said, I've come to the conclusion that if you're doing that and you're doing complicated pieces of work, that you're always going to have a certain element of the people that are watching what you do who don't get it all at one time. If there's too much, it's not like, you know, we've never, ever tried to create fast food for the ears, ever. You know, where it's just like, and it's gone, you know, McDonald's of the recording industry. We never wanted to be that, you know. But when you do something, like I said, that's multidimensional, it's always hard for people to catch up with all of it. And sometimes they never catch up with all of it. In this case, you know, it took 8, 9 years for somebody to come around to it. And it's funny because when we go on and do different kind of records, you know, people go, why don't you do what you did before? And I said, well, we're still doing that, you know. No, you're not. No, you're not. I said, well, you're not seeing it exactly the way we're seeing it, you know, because to me it looks the same.
I'm sure a lot of people who heard the first album, saw the pictures, saw the shows in those days would be surprised to see you.
Norway.
Yeah, except for Norway, where you got banned, yeah. A lot of them would probably be surprised to see you talk rationally, slowly about things, because they all expect this monstrous thing to burst into blood and gore all the time. Have you changed?
Aren't they silly?
Yeah, have you changed or have we?
I think over a period of years, I was talking about in the break a minute ago that I did 800 interviews on the last album. And that's only on one album, you know, and I've probably done countless thousands now. And before this record's over, I reckon I'll do probably about 1,000. That's a lot of talking. And pretty soon you get to go to a lot of places, you cover a lot of ground, and eventually what you have to say starts to fall on ears that were once deaf ears, but they've got to acknowledge what's going on. And this is where TV is a very powerful tool, because I can get across exactly what I'm trying to say to them on television where I could never get it across in a written word. You know, in a magazine, that's usually only fanzine type things, and other people don't really look at that, and they never understand if you have something that is really valid that you have to say, you know, and especially these type of things. I found that one of the reasons the parents and PMRC, those organizations, got very upset with us was because they did not understand what we were trying to do. I mean, I've always thought that in one way or another we were having something to say. But I'll tell you what, in this business, and the fans that we have, you do not walk up to them and tap them on the shoulder and try to tell them something. If you want their attention, you got to grab them by the throat, you know. And that's the mistake that parents make. You know, they walk up and say, excuse me, little Johnny, can I tell you this? You know, and the kid don't want to hear that, you know. You got to get his attention first before he listens. And that's never seemed to be a problem that we ever had, was getting people's attention, you know.
But when you watch footage of your performances in the early days with the blood and the guts and the stuff, do you enjoy watching it now? Or?
It's just different, you know. It's because there's parts of that we will even incorporate into this new show. I mean, when we take Crimson Idol out on tour, we will do the show in its entirety from beginning to end. Well, the first thing, let me back up a little bit. First thing we're doing is all the Monsters of Rock all throughout Europe, and that starts in August. And after that's over, then we take the Crimson Idol out on tour, and then, like I said, we will do it in its entirety from beginning to end. But there's 9 characters in the story, and Charlie's just one of them. And when Charlie makes his entrance, Charlie meets a very ugly demise. You know, I mean, it's like live by the chainsaw, die by the chainsaw, but it's also very symbolic of what I was talking about, what the industry is, because whole idea of Chainsaw Charlie, the chainsaw is representative of what the industry out there is. It's a symbol, because they cut these kids up to little pieces, and they leave them for dead on the roadside, and then when their career's over, they find somebody to take their place, and then when that guy's done, they find another to take his place, and another one, and another, and it's never ending. I see things differently now, you know, and also living in LA for 15 years, I have developed not a cynical attitude, but I grew up in New York City, so therefore I was streetwise to begin with. But living in Los Angeles now, I've developed a different kind of street smart, where if a guy's, you know, trying to screw somebody over in business, I smell those guys coming, you know, a mile down the road before they ever get up close, you know. I mean, they have similar traits and patterns. So nobody really gives me any stick in LA, because I've got a reputation for saying pretty much whatever's on my mind. And it's got me in trouble more often than not, and will undoubtedly get me in trouble in the future. But I just, you know, I must have been Matt Dillon in a past life or something, I swear, because when I see things that are wrong, I have to say something. But I tell you, that to me is what the essence of rock and roll is about. Because rock and roll is supposed to be about revolution and anarchy, and when you see something wrong somewhere, you should say something about it. Because see, what you do for a living and what I do for a living is the same thing. I mean, we're both reporters. You use a television camera and I'm using music, and it's the same thing. So if you see something that's wrong, and I was talking about that great gift that we've been given, we have not just a responsibility, we have an obligation to say to them what it is you've seen. And the problem with television and records is it's become so homogenized and prostituted that it has not become the tool that it was, either one are not the tool that they were originally intended to be. And that's really, really sad. You know, and it's not so bad in Europe, because television in Europe overall is still a lot better than it is in America. I mean, I got 67 channels at home, and, you know, 62 of them aren't worth watching. You know, I mean, it's mind rot, and that's not what the tool is supposed to be.
Never know what to expect on the inside. Get your tickets now. Okay, all right.
Really scary, mister.
Which direction are you guys going now? How's the band coming? What's
Pomona.
happening next?
That direction.
We're going to
Well,
Pomona.
you went that way.